This is the part 2 video segment involving LLCs, limited liability companies, out of chapter 38. Where we pick up where we left off. As you may recall, LLCs, limited liability companies, are an invention of state legislatures, and they're a fairly new concept. LLCs combine the best of both worlds. On the one hand, you have limited liability, like a corporation. On the other hand, you have great deals with regard to taxation, in that it's like a partnership. It passes through the entity, and the individuals are taxed directly, as opposed to some form of double taxation like a corporation. Although for whatever reason the people in an LLC can choose to be taxed like a corporation, most likely they're going to choose to be taxed like a partnership. So best of both worlds, limited liability and great tax consequences. We talked about how you set up the LLC by filing the Articles of Organization, usually with the Secretary of State's office, and you're up and running. You get your contracts going, and you're running the LLC. Now, this next segment, video segment, talks about how do you run the LLC? What happens? Well, there's two ways that LLCs are run. One is member-managed LLCs. The other one is manager-managed LLCs, and they're pretty straightforward, and they're pretty self-explanatory. Member-managed LLCs are managed and run by the members of the LLC, the people who put it together, the members, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 members. A manager-managed LLC is when the members of the LLC bring in one or more people from outside the LLC and hire them to work as managers of the LLC. There's a small chart comparing and contrasting the two on page 728 of your text, so you may want to look at that. Well, what about the members themselves? What roles and responsibilities do they have? This part's going to sound like deja vu these next few minutes because it's very, very similar to a partnership. When it comes to members of an LLC, they have a fiduciary duty to the other members and to the LLC. Sound familiar? It is. A duty of care and a duty of loyalty. Members of the LLC have a duty of care, that they will not engage in illegal activities or grossly negligent activities that would breach their duty of care. If they do make an honest mistake or a mistake that's based upon negligence, that's not a good thing, but it's not a breach of duty of care. It has to be grossly negligent or intentional bad acts. When it comes to the duty of loyalty, you as a member must not do something that would be considered a conflict of interest or that would go against the LLC. And if you do find yourself in that position, you need to sit down with the other members of the LLC and provide full disclosure so that they can choose whether or not to continue down that road with you in that potential conflict of interest. So again, all very similar to the whole concept that we covered previously with regard to partnerships. So let's talk about you filed the Articles of Organization for the LLC. You got your guys all together, the 4 or 5 members or whatever. You're going to run the company. Well, how do you know how to do that? Well, what you got to do is put together about the same time that your attorney has provided for you the Articles of Organization. Your attorney has also probably put together an LLC operating agreement. Well, what is that? Well, that's a situation. Let's pull that up. That's a situation where the agreement kind of lays down the ground rules, the rules of the road for how the business needs to be run. It's gonna talk about how it's going to be managed. It's going to speak to how the profits will be divided. It'll talk about how the members' interests might be transferred if they want to be bought out or a new one wants to come in. Whether dissociation by a member can trigger a dissolution of the LLC, and how voting rights might be apportioned out amongst the members. There's a great study tool on page 731 of the text that goes through the various elements that might be included in an LLC agreement. and gives a nice summary of each topic. I submit that to you for your review. If there's some type of dispute that arises later on among the members and it's not addressed in the LLC operating agreement, then the appropriate state law, LLC statute, will govern the outcome. So it probably makes sense for the attorney representing the LLC to cover as many issues as possible. The transactional attorney that's putting together that agreement is looking for all the landmines that exist down the road to make sure that they're all addressed, so that if there does become a problem later on, it will be properly addressed without any ambiguity in the LLC agreement. So you're running along, you're operating at the LLC, it goes well for a long period of time, but you reach a point where someone may choose to dissociate from the LLC. Well, hopefully the operating agreement addresses that. But if it doesn't, as we've indicated before, when it comes to partnerships, the same rules apply. A member of an LLC has the power to dissociate from the LLC, but they might not have the right. And if they choose to dissociate, it might trigger all types of cataclysmic events. It might result in the eventual dissolution of the LLC, because if that member is a key player and they choose to dissociate, the LLC could just kind of crumble like a house of cards, which would not be good. And if that happens, the other members of the LLC might choose to file a lawsuit against that member who is dissociated and claim that the member has wrongfully dissociated from the LLC and owes damages. Again, that is hopefully going to be addressed in the operating agreement so that it can be done in an organized and non-acrimonious fashion. If a person does dissociate from the LLC, then their duty of loyalty terminates. They can go about and do as they please, but their duty of care with regard to the various decisions they made while they were a member is still in play. So if something bad does happen and it was due to their gross negligence or intentional bad act while they were a member, they could still be held responsible and still be found that there's a breach of duty of care and breach of their fiduciary duty. Well, let's go on and talk about possible along with dissociation, dissolution of an LLC. What happens if there is a dissolved LLC? Well, it's again very similar to a partnership. You get all the assets of the LLC and liquidate them. All the inventory, all the office furniture, and so forth. All the assets, sell them off, liquidate them. Then when you take the money that you have and you pay off all the debts of the LLC, including any debts that may be owed to members of the LLC, pay off all the debts, and then whatever is left over will be paid off to the members based upon their ownership interest or per the agreement, the operating agreement. If the operating agreement is a good one, it will spell out the whole dissolution process and cover it up. So that's and cover it rather. So that's the dissolution and the winding up of the LLC. And also the LLC will, the operating agreement will probably address if there is not a dissolution but a dissociation, how to buy that person out. I didn't cover that previously. So that pretty much covers everything about LLCs that you need to know. And the last segment, last part of this chapter deals with what are known as other types of business forms. Special business forms, joint ventures, syndicates, joint stock companies, business trusts, cooperatives. These are other types of business forms that are still out there, that are still used on occasion, although not a whole lot. So the textbook does reference them. There's a nice study guide on page 737 of the text that gives a good, 1 or 2 sentence working definition of all of these different types of business forms. as a study tool, what I strongly recommend, because if you are presented with a question of a true-false question, a joint venture is da-da-da-da-da-da, you want to make sure that you know the definition so you can see whether or not, or say whether or not, that question is true or false. So look at page 737. Make sure you understand and have committed to memory all the working definitions of a joint venture, syndicate, joint stock company, business trust, and cooperative. And that should do the trick for you in preparation for the test. Well, that pretty well covers it for chapter 38. And the next video segments that we'll be covering will pertain to chapters 39 and 40. And that will be it for the semester. Can I get a woohoo? Thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon. Stay safe and stay healthy.